Minister, likewise, I think this should have been a separate piece of legislation. It's a very, very important piece of legislation, and those of us who participated in the, as I think you did, in the committee to look at repealing the 8th Amendment for the recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly would have dealt with this issue quite substantially, because one of the things which we know substantially reduces crises pregnancies is the provision of contraception. And in that amendment, I want to make similar points to what Deputy Davy Cullinane just made. Sorry, it's my brain fog. And also to say to you that the one section that I think is really very confusing, and I want you to answer a few specific questions on it, is section 67E, subsection 6 in this amendment, which explicitly says, in making regulations under subsection 5, the Minister shall not prescribe an age under the age of 17 years. And you did say to us there that to change that would require a legislative amendment. So somebody here would have to introduce a bill to amend that sometime in the future. Otherwise, it ties you and future Ministers for Health into precluding anybody under the age of 17 from having access to free contraception. Now, I just checked the ancillary recommendations of the Committee on the 8th Amendment, and it explicitly says that all people shall, it's recommended that all people shall have access to free contraception. Now, the upper age limit, over 25, 26 and over, is one that I reckon you're going to talk about costs in relation to, but that doesn't mean that it protects people who may have had enough children and want to control their families but find it very, very expensive, which contraception and visits to doctors are. But this is a very worrying one. And the reason I say it's worrying is because there's a good report there from the HSE on, and I'd like you to draw your attention, which you probably know about it, an information summary about teenage pregnancy in Ireland from the year 2000 to 2020. And there are a number of factors which are leading to a decline in teenage pregnancies. And that's a great thing to see, that crisis pregnancies among teenagers and pregnancies in general among teenagers are reducing. And they go through a list of examples as to why: schemes to reduce student disengagement with the education, to support young people at risk of early school leaving, to introduce better sexual and relationships education in the curriculum, the development of a wellbeing policy, on and on and on. And they finished with increased access to contraception and information. Now, obviously, we welcome the reduction in crisis pregnancies, in particular among teenagers, but in general, pregnancies among teenagers. But I think you're putting a barrier in their way. And I think I'd like you to be able to answer. I was shocked when I saw it there. Like, why did you have to include that? Because what you're doing is not just saying that, you know, the age of consent might be the legal thing or whatever, but you're actually precluding changes to this for future Ministers for Health without a bill going forward. And the decline in teenage birth rates is very significant. It's 73% over that 20-year period that I talked about. Teenage births as a share of the total births have declined even further, emphasising the reduction in this cohort. Surely we want to see this continue. And if we do want to see it continue, we can't deny the reality that teenagers, and there's more evidence there from the Irish Family Planning Association to show from their studies that teenagers, whether anyone in this House likes it or not, or the rest of the world likes it or not, that behaviour among school-aged teenagers shows that approximately 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 4 boys aged 15 to 17 report having had sexual intercourse. Now, the more we can do to help them understand sexual relationships, to help them protect themselves in those sexual relationships, then the better. And precluding them, specifically precluding them, actually is baffling to many of us. Young people in care are also identified as a particularly vulnerable group and report early sexual initiation from peers, their peers. So all of this is putting younger people at risk. And it flies in the face, I believe, of all the progressive measures that we wish to engage in, and is pointed out very well by the HSE report. And it makes it difficult, if you include that, to reach the most vulnerable in our society, who are under the age of 17 and to help them avail of free contraception. So I want to ask you a couple of questions to, first of all, please explain to us why you specifically put that clause into this legislation. And instead of addressing a gap that exists for that group, you're now closing down even further access to it. So there needs to be a rationale for this amendment. I'd also like to ask you what proposals you intend to bring forward to resolve the legal uncertainty with respect to the age of sexual consent and access to sexual and reproductive health services, and what is the time frame of addressing this extremely serious exclusion of this vulnerable cohort from the free contraception scheme. If you had left it out, you wouldn't be, we wouldn't have a problem, but you've specifically included in. So I'd ask you to please address those questions.